Welcome to Beer and Iron, where we talk about real cast iron cooking and share recipes with beer as an ingredient. Grab a beer, set that cast iron on the heat, and prepare to flip your expectations. We're serving up tales and recipes that are well seasoned and never half-baked. This is where the good stories live. I'm Sulae, brew and stew maestro, here to share a story, cook something worth eating, and bring back the yum to your plate. Whenever I reach for my cast iron skillet, I hear Granddaddy's words.
Sulae, you'll be cooking with this long after I'm gone and in the ground.
Back then, I had no idea how much that gift would come to mean. It wasn't really a set of skillets. It was the beginning of a legacy meant to outlast even him. Granddaddy and Grandma Ella lived on a farm in Franklin Parish, Louisiana. After Grandma Ella had been cared for at the home, Granddaddy, now alone, would call me up. Not to outright ask for a visit, but with a gentle nudge.
Figs are in and on the tree. You better come get some before the birds do.
Or,
that Brad is full of sweet taters. Come get you a box before they're all gone.
A day or two later, I'd drive out. We'd sit in the shade with iced tea, talking about the way things were and the way things ought to be. Those visits became cherished memories, and as I grew older and moved into my first apartment, Granddaddy found ways to stay connected. He'd call and ask,
Sulae, when's the next time you gonna be in Wagner? There's something I want to give you.
During our visit that afternoon, he insisted I take a few odds and ends he'd gathered. Before I left, he disappeared inside the house. He returned with a new but opened, boxed, labeled Wagner's 1891 Original Cast Iron Cookware, 3-piece natural skillet set. He handed it to me with this certain gravity.
Sulae, you'll be cooking with this long after I'm gone and in the ground.
These skillets weren't just something he'd had laying around the house he'd hoped I'd find use for. This was different. Even so, time moved on, life got busy, and those skillets stayed tucked away and out of sight. Truth be told, they sat in that box for years, until the evening of Granddaddy's funeral. That night after his funeral, I finally pulled those skillets out. Inside and between the number 5 and number 8 skillets was a piece of tablet paper with his cornbread recipe written on it and in his handwriting. Finding that recipe brought back a flood of memories from my childhood and even as a younger adult. Granddaddy and Grandma Ella would do this little pre-dinner dance in the kitchen as they finished up the meal they would prepare for us. Grandma Ella was the cook in their home, and cook she could. But Granddaddy was the cornbread guy. Grandma Ella would be cooking a meal and know just when to let Granddaddy know.
Clayton, it's time for the cornbread.
She knew just how long it'd take for that cornbread to be table ready and timed her cornbread call so the meal came in hot and ready and all at the same time. I'd made cornbread before in those standard 9x13-inch pans where you'd end up cutting squares rather than wedges. Back then, I'd have to apologize when I served my different versions of my cornbreads. It's cornbread, but it ain't Granddaddy's cornbread. His was a simple recipe, but the way he created, I tell you what. This cornbread recipe was almost Granddaddy's bespoke family recipe, not only by the ingredients, but also by the technique he'd used to create it. As I mixed the batter and poured it into the skillet, I realized I wasn't just making cornbread. I was reaching back to that old farmhouse kitchen and to that call,
Clayton, it's time for the cornbread.
Isn't it amazing how a familiar scent from the kitchen can sweep you back through the years? Almost like the aroma of cooking meals stirs stories long tucked away and seemingly forgotten. That cornbread was amazing. It had everything I remembered: flavor, texture, and spiritually speaking, a certain warmth. More than the temperature of the cornbread, you know. It had everything except one thing: Granddaddy. Since then, those skillets have become a fixture in my kitchen. During those early years, a new or used piece of cast iron would often make its way into my kitchen. Slowly, over those same years, other pieces of cookware, stainless, aluminum, and even glass cookware found their way out of my kitchen by means of secondhand stores, garage sales, or even the recycle bin. Every batch of cornbread cooked in those cast iron skillets is a quiet tribute to Granddaddy's legacy and the simple rituals that, keep those family memories shimmering in the warmth of tradition. Yes, tradition. After all, tradition is not about grand gestures. Sometimes it's the countertop presence of a well-used, well-seasoned skillet and the stories that rise with the steam of a fresh pan of cornbread. Now, so many years later, Granddaddy's great-grandson, my son, enjoys his cornbread. To me, this recipe was one of those ways I've kept my family memories close, one supper at a time. And now, I'd like to share it with you. First, you gotta start with a hot cast iron skillet. This recipe fits nice and fine in a 10.5-inch skillet, your number 8 skillet. Take 2 tablespoons or maybe a little more of butter and place it in that skillet. Butter. Butter, my friends, butter. We're making cornbread. Butter will be the key to both flavor, and it will all but guarantee that that cornbread just pops out of that skillet when we ask it to. Bacon grease, olive oil, or any number of other oils? Nope. First, it'll taste funny. Second, you'll end up having to soak that pan later to get them broken pieces of cornbread to let loose of the bottom of your number 8, I tell you what. Slide that skillet into your oven and preheat that oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit or 215 degrees Celsius. Let it preheat while you mix your ingredients. We want a wicked hot skillet. Later, when that cornbread hits that butter and starts to sizzle and froth up around the edges, you'll know you're doing it right. I want that cornbread batter to hit that hot butter and start cooking even before it finds its way to the surface of that cast iron skillet. Granddaddy would always set out 2 medium bowls, a Foley fork, a 1-cup measuring cup, and a teaspoon measuring spoon to get things ready. I use a rubber or silicone spatula instead of a Foley fork for my mixing and pouring. No, I'm like you, I ain't got a Foley fork either. That spatula will work great as a squeegee to get all the batter out of that bowl and into that skillet. Mix the dry ingredients first in one bowl, and then the wet ingredients in another. That baking powder will start its magic as soon as the ingredients get wet. I want that process to wait until I have a hot and ready skillet. Don't add oil to the cornbread ingredients directly. Granddaddy always believed in butter and plenty of it. He'd drop a generous grandma's measure, at least 2 tablespoons, right into that skillet while it preheated. He'd add the butter in 2 or 3 chunks that would hit the bottom of the cast iron skillet with that familiar thud. The order of sounds became so familiar. The butter chunks hitting the bottom of the skillet, the oven door opening with that old spring sound, the skillet sliding along those oven racks, and the door shutting closed. Placing the butter in the pan will create both flavor and a cornbread crust to die for. That butter will find its way into that batter, don't you worry none. It'll also help the cooked cornbread to just pop out of that skillet. Here's a list of the dry ingredients. 1 cup of cornmeal, 1 cup of all-purpose flour, 4 teaspoons of baking powder, and a teaspoon of salt. Mix all that around and have it ready for the wet ingredients you're going to mix next. Set out a 1-cup measuring cup and fill it halfway, 1/2 cup, with beer. Yes, beer. Granddaddy wasn't a beer drinker, not much anyway, but he did keep a few beers around for his cornbread. If you're anything like me, when you're cooking a meal, you're already drinking a glass of beer. Just pour about 1/2 cup of that beer into that measuring cup. You've already taken a sip? No worries. This is an excuse for a second. Beer, that is. But if you're already on your second, you better just use some of what you're already sipping. Shh, no one will know. We're about to cook at 425 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 2 degrees hotter than hell. It'll be okay. However, if you're making this cornbread for an after-the-sermon church social or a Dutch oven gathering,
dinner time!
You better open up a new beer, because I may be a fellow congregant and about to enjoy your cornbread at the monthly after-church potluck. But then again, there are those congregations known as the one-cuppers, so I guess it's all good. No worries. Okay, Sulae, 1/2 cup of beer, got it. But what kind of beer? I knew you'd ask that question. Use an easy drinking lager or other low IBU beer. IBU. What is IBU? IBU stands for International Bitters Unit, the measurement of how hoppy that beer is. How bitter is your beer? That question could also be answered by asking, how hoppy is your beer? Bitter beer, think IPA. It's better to use a mild drinking, less hoppy lager similar to Budweiser, Corona, or Modelo. Not that those are suggestions, but most craft beer drinkers have enjoyed a tall Rainier lager, or a can of PBR at some point in their beer drinking careers. Anything similar to these types of beers will work, including Corona, Modelo, or a nice Rainier lager. Top off the 1-cup measuring cup with 1/2 cup of half and half or milk. I prefer half and half. We love coffee. Enjoy half and half in our coffee and have the stuff always on hand. Buttermilk or even expired milk is an option too. But careful on the expired milk and use your good judgment. Here, we consider food expiration dates as sort of a suggestion. In Granddaddy's time, families planned meals around the milkman's schedule. Mama used to reminisce about the clinking sounds of the glass milk bottles at dawn. Milk's perishability reinforced its image as fresh, wholesome staple tied to the rhythm of everyday life. But don't think for a moment that turned milk was tossed. No sir, no ma'am. That stuff was great in recipes like biscuits and even Granddaddy's cornbread. So Mama would say. Dairy options have different consistencies. Truth be told, there's more water in cabbage than in a glass of milk. Keep that dairy choice out or a little extra beer nearby in case you need to add some if the batter gets too thick. If you're using buttermilk, it's all but guaranteed you'll need to add more, and expect it to be as much as 1/4 of a cup or more. Basically, we're adding a cup or more of a combination of dairy and beer, or just a cup of dairy if you're looking for the dry version of Granddaddy's cornbread. No, the cornbread won't be dry. Nope, not at all. When I say dry, think dry county. Dry county, dry cornbread. You get it? Yeah, you do. You're my people. Add 1 egg to the wet ingredients. I sometimes will add 2 eggs. 2 eggs will create a smoother, thinner batter with the cornbread having a cake-like consistency without the cake-like sweetness from boxed cornbread wannabes. Blend the egg in with the dairy and the beer. Check on your cast iron skillet and the butter. Don't let that butter burn. It'll be okay if it gets toasty. That's just how we want it. Expect some solid parts and pieces from that butter in there. Real butter ain't like Crisco. Once that cast iron skillet is wicked hot and ready, but still in the oven, mix the wet ingredients with the dry ingredients. Use the rubber spatula to really mix the ingredients well. Be sure to get to the bottom so there's no powdery ingredients that surprise you when you're ready to pour this into that hot skillet. If the ingredients are a bit too thick, add a bit more beer or dairy to thin it down. Just add a little, and then a little more if you need to. Easy does it. Cornbread batter should be thick but pourable, similar to a hearty pancake batter. When you mix the dry and wet ingredients, the batter should hold its shape but still spread out easily and most likely on its own when it's poured into the hot skillet. Grab the skillet out of the oven with a mitt or handle holder and set it on the stovetop. Immediately pour the batter into that hot pan. It should froth and foam around the edges. It may sizzle a bit. Use that rubber spatula to squeegee out every bit of that batter. Can I use squeegee as a verb? Well, I guess I can. If you're spreading a thick batter, just spread that batter evenly to the skillet. If it's just right, give that skillet a bit of a shake and even that batter out. Now, back in that hot oven. Bake the cornbread for about 20 to 25 minutes. When you get the hang of making Granddaddy's cornbread, you'll know just when it's ready. Until then, you could use the old toothpick test in the center to make sure. Once the cornbread is baked, pull it out and set it aside to cool. Don't try to toss it out of that pan just yet. It's hot and expanded, and it presses against the edges of that skillet, holding on to dear life. Wait a bit. Let it get comfortable. Let it get cool. That cornbread will pull back from the edges of that skillet just a bit. You'll likely start seeing a space between the cornbread's crust and the cast iron skillet's edge as it cools. When Granddaddy's cornbread came out of the oven and he set it out on the wooden cutting board to cool, Grandma Ella May knew it was time to pour the tea. By the time the table was set, she'd flip that cornbread out and set it out there for everyone to cut off a wedge. You could just slice it right out of that skillet. Me? No, I ain't doing that. It'll make score marks in your skillet seasoning. Best to take a plate or a drying rack and lay it over the top of that skillet and over that cornbread. Using an oven mitt, turn the two together to flip out that cornbread. The undercrust will now be on the top. It should be darker and crisper than the top, which is now on the bottom. It'll cut easier upside down too, trust me on this one. Now how does one eat this cornbread? Me? I like to bite the pieces crust side down to really get the buttery cornbread flavor. There's just something about corn and butter. You know, buttered movie popcorn, buttered corn on the cob. Yes, there's something about the flavors of butter and corn that really work good together. My love for cast iron today stemmed from those 3 cast iron skillets and that cornbread recipe. At that time, I had never thought about buying cast iron cookware, and cooking with cast iron, I didn't have the faintest idea what to do. The good Lord himself could have handed down an 11th commandment, and it'd been like asking a squirrel to do algebra. I didn't have the foggiest notion about where to start, until I found that recipe on that piece of tablet paper with his cornbread recipe. I'd made different versions of cornbread plenty of times before, but there was nothing quite like Granddaddy's cornbread baked in that cast iron skillet. It felt just like stumbling up on a secret stash of bacon at a vegetarian potluck, or maybe even discovering fire even though everybody else was already roasting marshmallows. Sure, I knew cast iron. My grandparents had all used it, but back then I thought those heavy pans were just for old folks. It's funny how perspectives change. Looking back now, I'm the same exact age they were when I thought they were old folks. I understand their love for cast iron and they're resisting all that new stuff. If you're my age, you'll understand. If you're younger, well, your time's coming sooner than you think, if you're lucky. Trust me on that one. Those 3 cast iron skillets from Granddaddy, finding that recipe after his funeral, and the flavor and texture of that first cornbread started this whole thing. It's the reason I have 2 closets full of cast iron pots and pans, and likely why my house leans on its foundation a little bit in that direction. It's the reason I fell in love with cast iron and have since discovered that some of the best memories are captured on a piece of tablet paper, handed down, seasoned with love, and shared around the table, one supper at a time. Over the years, I've noticed most cornbread recipes are similar in their making. Some add sugar, while others add oil to the batter. I found recipes that sort of mimic Granddaddy's cornbread recipe. Yeah, it's kind of like the wheel. There's so many other great cast iron chefs out there that have created their own versions of cornbread, and that's okay. They all seem to be a little bit similar in their touch and measurements. Maybe to them this recipe will taste the same. Maybe so. But for me, the secret ingredient in this recipe that makes it so much more delicious is the memory of Granddaddy and me sitting in the shade with iced tea, talking about the way things were and how they ought to be. And there you go. Granddaddy's cornbread recipe is yours to try and enjoy. You craving more cast iron creations? Well, swing by beerandiron.com to print Granddaddy's cornbread recipe and to discover an extensive tap list of other recipes, some with video walkthroughs to make your next meal a hit. Until we gather again, keep your skillets hot and your stories on tap. Now, y'all don't be a stranger. Let me know how your cornbread turns out. Head over to beerandiron.com and join the conversation. At Beer and Iron, there's always room for one more at our table. Keep the tradition sizzling and the stories pouring. We'll see you next time on beerandiron.com.